Short, sweet, advanced embed with Go Generate. Let's serve some Swagger UI. So about me, Andy, longtime Go user, Google developer expert in Go. I work in security research and support, formerly of SourceFire and Cisco, now with CrowdStrike. I have way too many hobbies. So what is Embed? Package Embed is new in Go 1.16. We've talked about it before, but if you're new or new to the package, like if you haven't heard of it, it allows you to embed static assets into your binaries at build time. So the oops. It's really nice because that allows you to, you can, for say, web services, anything that kind of maybe serves like static front end kind of files, you can just package them together. Things that might include, or for example, if you're writing something more along the lines of like a desktop application or something like that, that uses like a kind of web-based tooling to provide your front end, to kind of make up that gap for Go's, so far lack of like a really solid standardized front end framework, you can do that. And it dovetails with the new file system package, which, maybe we can go into a little bit. We can go over the release notes or something before we end the meetup tonight. SwaggerUI is a fancy UI for serving up an open API specification. The open API specification, if you're not familiar, formerly called Swagger, the two names are relatively interchangeable, is a way to describe the kind of interaction and routes of your API in a systematized way in either JSON or YAML. And these files then describe not only all of the different routes and methods that your API defines, but also the data types that interact with it, and the types that the user needs to send, and the systematized like structured data that they can expect to get back. So it describes not only the surface of your API, but also the schema. So that's great because it can allow you to do a lot of really nifty things working from the spec. You can generate your server, you can generate your client, et cetera, et cetera. SwaggerUI is a web-based front end serving this up. So what you can do is you can define your specification and bundle it with SwaggerUI. And then not only does it provide kind of interactive documentation about the surface of your API, but it also allows users to interact with it directly in the browser if they want, which is pretty handy, especially during development or if someone is developing against your API. So that's very handy. So idea, let's embed it into our running API. So if we do that, we can just provide a route that serves up the Swagger spec and the API itself. And then if you can reach the API, you can see the spec, you can generate a client from that spec, you can interact with the API directly. The spec is probably checked into the repo and probably drives code generation of some sorts. So, it's probably part of the development lifecycle, ideally. So why not just kind of package it in with the API itself using Go Generate? So how? Well, we can make it a module to do this for us. So this module, let's see, we could have it, bundle up the latest Swagger UI using Go Generate, and then the Swagger UI as downloaded, the releases from GitHub typically comes bundled with a generic example specification for a pet store API. This is intended to showcase not only the features of the specification, but of the UI itself. However, we're not all developing pet stores, I hope. So if you just use it vanilla, then you kind of have to go in and like load up the API and then point it at your spec. And it would be nice if we could just kind of like use this module, feed it a spec and get back like a handler, right? That then we can just serve with net HTTP. And then whenever the user hits that, they will get the front end and the spec, right? So cool. And then maybe we can just kind of embed, we can embed twice, right? So in the module, we can embed all of the SwaggerUI and provide the ability to get the handler back. And then in our API, we can embed our specification. And then at runtime, when we start up, we can just kind of feed that in, get the handler back, and then there you go. We got our SwaggerUI. So I did it already. I already did this. But like I noticed earlier today that, it needs some work. I tried to like overlay the file system. I got like really into like the new IOFS, messing around with that. And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you could have a file system and then like layer them so that like you kind of like a fuse or like a union FS, or, like how it works in container mounts. And then I could just like, kind of swap out the spec that way. It's dumb. It was dumb. And I ended up having to use like the test FS, which is like the end memory, file system implementation that's designed to for testing IOFS. Like, why? And then of course, like I had to mux it too. That's dumb. That's silly. Why would I do that? Like I could just, do it with serve mux. And I made the user provide like a spec type. Like I said earlier, Swagger supports JSON and YAML. Turns out that's unnecessary. It'll just go ahead and detect that. So, well, in that case, I can just, instead of like having the user give me bytes and then like I try to get very clever with it. I'll show you in the code in a minute, but like I try to get clever with it and provided them with like an iota enum that's like, SwaggerUI.json or .yaml, and then I would generate that. There's no need for that. Like the UI will detect it and just have a generic name. Who cares? So just serve bytes, right? So let's fix it like right now. All right, cool. So let's stop that share and then we'll share. Where is it? There we go. Okay, cool. Here we go. All right. So here it is. And we'll talk a bit about the dumb stuff I did and the cool stuff. There's cool stuff too. So the structure of the module is very light. I use the Apache license because that's what SwaggerUI is under, and I don't really care, and so better not to conflict with it. I have a current version.txt, which actually just is it's mostly there as kind of like a lock file, I guess, kind of, or whatever. It basically defines the version of the SwaggerUI that has been downloaded. We'll get into that in a second. It's really only useful at generate time. And then I have my single Go file, right? And then here's my embed directory, and this contains all of the static SwaggerUI assets that we do not care about at all. So talk about generate, right? So Go generate, what's that for? Well, Go generate is typically used to do things like what I'm doing here, which is to say periodic kind of code generation stuff, right? So if you're writing a parser or whatever, and you need to like, you have a spec file or something that drives, like if Swagger is another place where this is used. You need to do these kind of periodic code generation tasks as a maintainer to check things in, to like update things, check things in if you make some changes, whatever. That's kind of what Go generate is for. So that's, and it's its own kind of directive. You can see it right here, right? But mostly it's just a way to kind of build these kind of things and do these kind of maintainer side stuff, and then check it in, right? And in an ideal world, we can, stay within the Go ecosystem. We don't, it's basically at the end of the day, it'll just kind of run shell commands. But if you are clever about it, you can stay within the Go ecosystem, and you can provide it nice and tidy, and it makes you feel good, like you're a good developer. So that's what I did. So the first thing to note here, it's got a build ignore tag. So this will not be built as part of our binary. This is strictly used for Go generate, which is to say it will be Go run, right? So more or less like a shell file, except it's Go. And what I have done is there's a lot of complicated stuff here, blah, blah, blah. I have a little struct so that when I talk to the GitHub API and I ask it for a latest like release tag, I can get it. That's all I care about. Moving on. Then I go, I get it from GitHub, I call their weird API, check status code, all this crap. I decode the response, blah, 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 blah. And then I get the tag. And then this is where current version comes in. So like I open current version and I see, oh, is that like different? If it is, if the version that the latest version is different, then I'll just download it. And then because I'm, feeling fancy, I'll like decompress it in memory and then tar everything out to the embed directory, delete that first. At least I hope I deleted that first. We'll check it later. Did you delete it? Okay, cool. So, yeah, so I get it, I uncompress it into memory. This is all just like the zip, the release, zip file, right? And then the one thing that then this is where I thought, okay, I'm gonna get really smart now, right? Like I've got my SwaggerUI. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna edit the index.html in there because it's got that like hard coded pet store thing that I was telling you about before. So I open up the index.html that came with SwaggerUI, and then I look for this like JavaScript declaration here when they're spinning up the UI for this like, Swagger JSON. And then I replace it with this Go template directive, right? Because like I'm clever and I want the user to be able to like, like they've got to define their spec, whichever spec type it is. Well, no, okay, but that's fine. And then like I create in the embed directory to where I've just downloaded everything, I create the OS, the new index.html file with the template directory in it. And I write it out there. And then I update the current version.txt. And then I tell myself, or I guess another maintainer, but realistically myself, that like it's been updated and to tag the repo. And the idea being, like I said before, Go generates for this kind of like generate your code, check it in, issue a new release kind of thing. And so what I figure is I'll just, semver my repo with the version of Swagger UI that I've downloaded. And that's probably what I will end up doing when I like actually release this thing, right? Okay, that's fun, cool. So and then we have in our single actual Go file of the package, we have that Go Generate Directive, which then of course, Visual Studio Code is very kind enough to give me like an automatic, generate deal for it. And this is where we get into embed. All right, so the new file system IOFS package as part of the standard library defines a generic read-only file system implementation. And it also defines a couple of like, well, it defines the implementation, the interface, and then it also kind of weaves this in throughout the rest of the standard library. And one of the places that is done is in HTTP, right? Because NetHTTP has the ability to kind of natively serve file systems and all the fun stuff that goes with that. Now, however, unfortunately, because it came before IOFS, it already has its own FS type. So now there's like a wrapper that we have to use. But that's fine. That's fine, whatever. The way that Go Embed works is if you give it a Go Embed directive like this, that will be attempting to find a resource. In this case, it's a directory. It's my embed directory that we just downloaded SwaggerUI to. And it will, if it's, in this case, we are embedding a directory into an embed.fs, right? So when we build this, this embed.fs, swag.fs will be a IOFS compliant in-memory file system containing all of the things inside of embed. So anybody who like imports our module and spins up a handler, they'll be serving this same content that we downloaded when we ran Go Generate and tagged the repo and all that, right? And this is where like I try to get clever. And I was like, okay, yeah, well, specs type string, meh, and this will be like the file suffix. And then I'll give them like the, you know, it's going to be a spec type. So like they have to give me a spec type more or less, except not really, but it's, you know, this is like me trying to be clever, you know, spec type YAML, blah, blah, blah. And then I have like I created a special Swagger wrap FS. And this is where it gets nuts because like I have the, you know, I have a static FS, which would represent my Swagger files here. And then my overlay FS, right? And then I I implement like an open method, and then I say, well, if it's in the overlay, then return that. Otherwise, return it from static. Like, okay. And then this is the part where, you know, this is really what I wanted to be able to do, is provide this handler method, right? The only one and only method, like from the SwaggerUI package, right? You give me your spec as bytes, and I will return you an HTTP handler that will serve SwaggerUI and the spec that you have just given me, right? And then it will be pointing SwaggerUI to that spec as like a reference, right? Like it'll put that path of yours of like spec.your file suffix into the index.html when you run the handler, right? So the way I was doing this is I've got this, you know, this template, and I generate like for the first thing I do is I created what's called FS sub. And what FS sub does is it's kind of similar to if you've ever done http.strip prefix, right? In this case, what it'll do is it'll take an existing file system, and then provided it has like this directory in it, it will return a new file system that is rooted there, right? So what I'm doing here is like when you run Go Embed, right? It will be creating a file system that has the embed directory at its root. And I don't want that. I just want to strip it away. So I create an FS sub and I remove that. Cool. And then like I parse my template like a clever guy, and I pass in you know, the spec type and the string of that, so that it like successfully, you know, swaps out the file suffix. And it's very painful, and I shouldn't be doing this. Okay, so what do we need to change? All right. So the first thing we should probably go ahead and change is we were talking earlier, and we, you know, I mentioned that we don't actually need to give it a special file suffix. We don't need to tell SwaggerUI if it's JSON or YAML. It'll figure that out. So instead of doing all this like dumb stuff we were doing up here, you know, replacing it with a template directory, screw that. Let's just go ahead and change it to Swagger_spec, no suffix, because that's how we roll, right? So now instead of like putting a template directive in there, we're just going to swap it out and say your base spec is the file called Swagger_spec. That's your link. Figure it out. All right, easy enough. So, all right, let's go look at SwaggerUI. So we don't need any of this stuff. Like the spec, spec type thing. That's dumb. Let's get rid of that. Like, we don't need that. And probably we don't need like this new. We should probably just go ahead and use like like serve mux. Like the only thing that we really care about replacing is the spec now, or we don't even care about replacing it. We just want it to be available when the browser hits it, right? Because they're going to hit this handler. The handler is going to send them the SwaggerUI to the browser. SwaggerUI is going to see from its own code that it's supposed to load this like Swagger_spec file, and then it's going to hit that same endpoint, the browser is going to hit that same endpoint to try and get that file. So really all we need to do is basically just serve up all of the contents of SwaggerUI. And if we see a request for Swagger_spec, well, then we'll send back the bytes that the user gave us instead. So we don't need any of this crap. So let's get rid of that too. Bam. I'm already feeling like so much lighter. So since we don't have a spec type anymore, now all we will be taking from the user is a spec that's bytes, right? Okay, so that's cool. This we still need, right? Because we still have that embedded file system that's coming here from SwaggerUI. We do not need to parse this template anymore. No, thank you. No, none of that. Oh God, definitely don't want this anymore. All right, so we will be returning a handler. So what is that handler going to handle? So what we'll do is let's create a new server mux, right? And then let's have it, let's add our special handler. For the Swagger specification. Whoops, wait a minute. Okay, we need something that will serve, kind of like send those bytes, and it needs to implement the handler func. So let's actually go up here and create something called, let's just call it byte handler, right? No need to export this bit of plumbing. Right. So now this will just take a byte slice and then return a handler func that spits it out. Easy enough. All right. So, well, we know handler funcs take in a response writer. And well, we're only going to be responding, so we don't really, we need to we need to satisfy the method signature, but we're not going to use this. We're not going to use the request, so we'll just ignore it. Right. And then done. Cool. So now we have a little quick little boop, a byte handler that will return us an HTTP handler that will just crap out whatever is in that byte slice. Okay, cool. That's easy enough. So now we've got that. And come back down here. And so when we see something that is coming in for /Swagger spec, then we will just go ahead and return the bytes from the spec that the user gave us. Cool. All right. And then we'll just handle everything else with the file server. Now, here's what I mentioned earlier. So because the HTTP package HTTP has its own like file system type, we now have a new method. So we're going to start the file server. We can see that HTTP file server, right? It needs an HTTP.file system, but we have, this new embed FS that implements the new IO FS type. So we have to like pass it. We have to like wrap it with this. Right. So now what we've got is, oh yeah, and then it's like so much nicer already. Look, you see all my dependencies go away. Okay, so now we're not doing this neither. Okay, boop. So now we create a kind of subsystem of the embedded file system. So we strip off embed. That way the user doesn't need to like hit our route and then say embed. And then we create a mux. And then so we just basically, if we happen to see it say Swagger spec, well, then we'll return the spec. But if we see anything else, then we'll just, serve up whatever's in that embedded file system. So that's cool. But let's take a look here. I seem to recall that I saw earlier today that that there's a newer version of SwaggerUI. So let's do that here. Oh, yep, there it is. Got a new release. All right. So now, like, we can see, like, there's been all these changes in the embedded file system, and that looks pretty good. So let's test this now. And I will switch to a new window. That's it. Yeah, coolsies. So we have a little guy in here called swag test, and then we'll import that package. I took the liberty of ahead of time coming in here and like doing a replace directive so that, because I haven't actually checked this in yet. And then pretty simple, we're going to go IOU to refile. Here's another new Go 116 thing. Oh God, where'd they put it? So IOUtil, like classically, it's been kind of like, what's that package do, right? Like everything or a bunch of different stuff. It's been kind of ill-defined. So it was really for like a lot of convenience methods, kind of like just give me the bytes from a file or whatever. So they moved it. They moved the functions in it to places that made sense. And I believe read file is now in OS. Let's find out. OS, is it os.read file? Ah, sweet. Okay. All right. So now we read in swagger.json from our local directory here, and that looks like this. Oh God. Let's look at the YAML. As our API post gets, all that stuff. So we'll read that in and we crap if something happens. And then we create a handler with the bytes, right? So we got these bytes. We'll just create a handler with the bytes from our spec and then handle that. And then, in theory, it should work, right? All right, so cool. It'll be on port 9000. And then let's do new share on my browser window, which is somewhere. Hold on. Can't find my browser window. All right, hold on. Ah, there it is. All right. New share. I lost it again. Hold on. There it is. Cool. All right. So we're serving on port 9000. And then Moon Truth. And there it is. So this is all being served from in memory of the running binary that I just showed you. If we click here, then here's that like JSON that I showed you before. This is all being served to the browser. And basically we just kind of step in and like substitute the running code. We substitute the Swagger spec that the user provides in bytes. And that's really handy because they can just give us bytes and get a handler back that does all this like fancy pants UI stuff for them. So with that, Embed is cool, and Go Generate, despite being old and relatively simple, is still cool if you use it for the right things. Do not overthink things like I did and use like testing stuff. And then you can check it out. It's at github.com/flowchartsman/SwaggerUI. I'll be updating it tonight with like this newly simplified, much less crappy code. And, you know, you're the best.